All right, fuck sticks. It's time for us to get a few things straight around here. Oh, Dio, subscribing 12 months. That's 1 year. Time flies when you're having fun. I get it. I understand. It's appreciated. But this might not be the episode where you wanted to resubscribe. This might be the clinic hours where you find out just how much of an asshole I really am. Because today, we're going all the way into the hotter takes in my inventory. We've done this before, hot takes, and we're going beyond. All of this is to be taken with no grains of salt. Everything's 100% true and accurate and represents exactly how I feel about everything. If you have your own hot takes that you want to pop up, that's up to you. I'm not your dad. But if you throw them in there, you should know that if you toss a hot take into my chat today, then I will respond to it. And you might not like what I have to say. We're going to get things kicked off. We're going to get things right started. 1 year, Erwin, that's it. 1 year for you? All right. I appreciate it. Let's see if you can appreciate this. First things first, anyone who uses the term roleplay needs to figure out their shit. I'm sick and tired of people who are throwing this term around as if it's the cleverest thing that they've ever thought of. Twitter ablaze with the idea that anybody who decides that they really like rolling dice somehow just aren't hip to the real part of role-playing. Fuck that. Fuck that. I'm tired of this. You're allowed to enjoy the game on its own damn merits. And if your game involves you rolling a hell of a lot of dice, that's on you. And that's just fine if that's what you want to do and your players want to do. And it is no less than any one of these lovey-dovey, oh my god, I've got to hold each other after the session because it's been so emotionally draining type of games that I see these people play in other places that don't roll these dice. Both ways are totally fine. I am so ready for people to start realizing that people are allowed to enjoy the game on their own terms. So get the fuck out of here with this roleplay shit. Because you know that if somebody is making that term 99% of the time, it's because they're looking down their noses right onto their computer screens, which means that they're probably leaning back so that they can still look down their nose directly at the screen just so that they can complain about people who don't play the game the way that they want to. You gotta cut that shit out. All right? And that's like the least hot take that I have to give today. The least. So let's just keep going. This is what I get for wearing polarized glasses. I can't even see the damn screen. Here's something else. If you're not rolling dice while you're playing in your role-playing game, you just might be missing the whole point. I see this as being held up as an example of the holy grail of role-playing. One of the things that everybody desperately needs is when the mechanics take a back seat and people get really involved in their character and the story, the acting, going in depth on all these emotions and shit. That's fine. But to say that this is somehow a better way to play is to ignore the fact that you went out and you bought, probably for a lot more money than you expected, a book that weighs more than your own head, and it is filled with rules. And those rules exist for a goddamn reason. Is to make sure that you know that you can roll these dice to inject a little chaos into your games, because otherwise they'd probably end up with a slap fight between all the players, not trying to work together and instead disagreeing on how a story should turn out. That little bit of chaos is actually the glue that holds all your worthless asses together. And if you decide to get rid of that and think that it's somehow an achievement, you need to have another think coming. Because at this time, you should know that if you do not roll dice during your session, that's because you didn't engage with that entire book's systems. And maybe, just maybe, that's not what you were going for. Maybe you have to understand that when you are playing in this game, it is a game which has rules for a reason, and you decided to use them. I'm not saying that if you don't roll dice in a session, you've somehow fucked up. What I'm saying is that you have to stop looking upon this as some kind of evidence that you're an amazing role player and that you have this monopoly on the idea that you are somehow that much more enlightened than everyone else. I like rolling dice, and I like not rolling dice. And when it comes to dice, there's some shit that I've got to get off my chest. Not that. I already saw that. If you're playing in a game that has custom dice, go fuck yourself. And I'm not even just talking about custom dice like are used in Fantasy Flight's clearly cash grabby. We have to make sure that people buy not just our books, but also our dice things. I'm talking about anything that uses polyhedral dice. What the fuck's wrong with a D6? Everybody has access to a D6. All you have to do is just go plunder your mom's Monopoly set, and you have at least 2. It's somehow this thing that people need to find a way to find these different kind of dice that they can throw down on a table, and for what? Because they've decided that probability isn't good enough if you can just deal with a 1d6 or 2d6. And these companies that decide to take these polyhedral dice and then print things that aren't even numbers on them or pips, but instead these weird-ass symbols that are hard to decipher at the best of times, just so that they can sort of claim that they're systems that are somehow way better than the other systems that you can get using books that know how to use a goddamn cube, are better somehow, but you have to invest more money into it? Get fucking real. Get fucking real. Don't even get me started, Pook, on the V5 dice. Oh, what's this? We can't even just use a normal D10 anymore. Now we have to have fucking hunger dice. And we have to have this weird-ass mechanic that for some reason we cannot even refer to a number anymore. Now we have to look at it as some kind of weird-ass chart. So yeah, you can use your D10s as long as you have this piece of paper in front of you that says what all of the numbers mean. I don't even fucking get it. And that's another thing, NFL. I mean, that is another thing. Dice companies are fucking with us. And they're the reasons why we can't get games that aren't D&D or Pathfinder. It's why everybody uses D10s. You want to have a game that uses D10 sets, 10D10? There aren't online retailers that sell 10D10 unless you're going with fucking Chessex or you're going on Amazon and buying the cheapest ass dice you possibly can. Do you like metal dice? Too fucking bad. You can't get a 10D10 metal set unless you're ridiculously lucky, or you probably live in a country like the United States that has all kinds of shit that they want to have and no one else in the world's allowed to experience their fucking bounty. I don't fucking get it. Why it's so hard for me to get a hold of some dice that aren't your standard D20, D12, D10 percentile dice, D8, D6, and D4. I don't want to have to buy singles. Singles suck. I want to have a dice set that looks really nice. We've had people donate dice sets to us. They're fucking amazing. But I know that they're hard to find. I know they're hard to get. And yet somehow people manage to go out of their ways to help us. It's because the dice companies just don't give a fuck about us anymore. And all they want is to support the fucking D20 revolution, despite the fact that D20 isn't even that compelling a system for a lot of people. So they need to get their shit together because, as everybody fucking knows, custom dice rule. When was the last time that you picked up dice and they just felt nice in your goddamn hand? That when you were rolling them around in your palm and you looked at the beautiful colors that you picked out, maybe they're slightly translucent, maybe they got some flecks of metallic paint or gold or silver buried deep inside them. That feels fucking good. And it's part of the whole experience of playing a role-playing game. It's not just about these ethereal words that float around above everybody's heads, never even recorded or taken down. millions and millions of hours of history just gone into the ether because nobody can give a damn about recording them. It's also about those fucking pieces of resin or glass or acetate or metal that you scatter across the table, possibly even into a wooden box that you spent way too much goddamn money for. It's all part of the experience. And that experience is something that's incredibly important for us. Roll20 is a piece of shit because Roll20 is the kind of thing that basically says that social communal atmosphere of role-playing can get ditched. In the meantime, you can just take all of your time staring at a screen and that's all you need. Because for some reason, the mechanics are way more important than actually interacting with somebody else for one goddamn moment of your life. That you don't even get the visceral tactile appeal of shifting things across the table or even launching the D20 directly into your partner's head, watching it embedded into their skull because they made some bonehead tactics play that fucked your character over. You don't even get to have that in D20 anymore. I don't even get it. Fucking shit. It's awful. But you know what else is awful? Dice. Dice suck. Why don't you try a game with a different mechanic for once in your goddamn life? Huh? Have you ever heard of the game like Dread, where you can actually set up a Jenga tower and have that be a moment of tension as you are trying to push blocks in and out and try to raise them and your character's life hangs in the balance? Or maybe Starcross, which is the same thing, except it's your character's ability to get boned down, or even just have one moment of fleeting happiness and love shared with somebody else who they're not even allowed to be with, and that all of it comes crashing to an end when that tower goes down? Huh? It's things like this. People who don't appreciate alternative mechanics, that means that role-playing is just going to be in a stagnant cycle where everyone's going to find out yet another way to wring out another possibility or probability from a fucking D20. And that's it. And I am just completely... I don't even get it. I don't even understand. All right? Fuck pay-to-play GMs. You know what, Kung Fu Fenris? Fuck you. Huh? Maybe I want to get paid. Maybe I demand my players to pay me $50 every time I sit down at a table. Maybe I just want them to cough up the cash so that I can deal with the fact that I have to run around and play nursemaid to all these people running around. And also, you're completely right, Kung Fu Fenris. People who decide that they want to get charged to run a game don't understand that this whole thing is actually a communal event and that the storyteller sitting at a table is one other player, somebody else who manages to create a story alongside everybody else, who has his head shoved so far up his own ass that he doesn't even see that his players are the most important part of the damn thing. That a storyteller has no other right to complain other than the fact that they have to deal with pressure. Fuck. And while we're talking about indie games, we got to stop giving indie games passes for not actually workshopping their shit. I totally understand if you want to release a one page out into the internet that you put all of 5 minutes work into and hope that it's good. But I see so many indie games right now that are lacking in playtesting and quality assurance. There are typos in their goddamn books. It's like hire an editor, for God's sake. They also deserve to see a little bit of scratch. Independent developers do manage to create an environment where they can actually let their creativity just soar, and at the same time we have to suffer when we get their creativity and it isn't even a fully baked meal yet. It's like digging into a cake and realizing that you're eating raw egg. We need to fucking deal with this. All right? We got to deal with the fact that people are too busy trying to spew their creative process out into the world without understanding that maybe you should take some time to figure out whether or not it's any good. And maybe you actually have to rely on some other people to look at your stuff and listen to them and listen to their critiques. Because maybe your first or second idea isn't actually good enough and it has to be your 50th. But that takes time and effort. And people don't want to put time and effort into things anymore because also nobody's fucking paying for role-playing games anymore. All they're doing is downloading the PDFs off websites and trying to share them among their friends so that nobody has to give a buck to somebody who spent years of their life trying to create something to bring you one moment of goddamn happiness in a world that's gone cold. Huh? Newer World of Darkness books have better indexing organization than 5th edition books do. Yeah, you know what I have to say to that? It turns out that layout editors deserve most of the credit for your role-playing games. You think it's the mechanics or the setting? Fuck that. It's the fact that you can pick up the book and actually read it. It's the fact that it's visually interesting, so you actually want to go through 680 pages worth of complete fictional bullshit so that then you can tell your own goddamn stories. Huh? Oh yeah, I had a goddamn hot take ready for this. It turns out that layout editors, or editors in general, don't get nearly enough credit. We like to jizz all over the fucking developers and designers of these games, and at the same time, they rely on the fact that editors make their garbled nonsense alphabet soup into a book that people actually want to fucking read. Huh? I don't even get why people aren't lifting them up on their shoulders and trotting them out. I know editors. I know how much shit they have to put up with. I've been an editor. And at the same time, no one's going to be saying, oh, wow, this book's so great. It looks like an amazing Picasso, Van Gogh, Michelangelo, O'Keeffe, I don't care who, just whatever, just spews onto the page, and it is a lovely work of art. That work of art isn't the goddamn designer. That's also a graphic artist, huh? Maybe it's somebody with a degree in design and illustration who manages to make the book worth a damn. Do you honestly think that the difference between independent RPGs and mass-produced books, like what we see coming out of Wizards of the Coast, is the designer's ability? Probably fucking not. Most likely, it's actually the fact that they can afford to hire people like illustrators, designers, and editors to make the book look like it's actually worth being in your hands. Huh? Not to mention, that index doesn't make itself. And if you want that index to actually be worth something, somebody has to go through your entire text and find every little bit of essential information and categorize it, and then prune that list to make sure that it's not too long. And yet none of you seem to be saying anything great about them. Who knows the words of Monty Cook? Monty Cook held aloft, but nobody pays attention to the fucking layout editors, and it's a goddamn crime. And they need to start learning real goddamn fast, because otherwise they're going to go for greener pastures. I already see this in the games industry where somebody decides that their skill set isn't being appreciated because the video game industry is a swamp. So they go into the industrial sector where they're going to get paid 3 times as much for something that isn't even going to touch the lives of 1% of the video games that people play. Huh? It's all just going to go to industry so that some oil magnate can make another $100 billion. And it's your fault because you didn't appreciate the goddamn layout editors for D&D. Just fucking deal with it. What's goddamn next? We've already seen that shit. And while I'm on the topic of game design, I know that I'm not a good one, and I can pretty much say that I'm probably better than the rest of you, because it's my fucking job. Now, I understand that we got a couple of other game designers in and among our community, and that's fine. Although not knowing the games that they've worked on, I don't know about whether I should give a damn about them. I know you don't need to give a damn about me. But the number of people that I see posting on these message boards, Discords, forums, Reddit, who think that they somehow know better than people whose job it is to pull out these mechanics and settings and designs and lambaste them because they don't understand that it's not all about making you happy. It's about making a group of people happy. It's about making the compromises so that everybody at the table can have a good time, except catering to your one pedantic little bullshit thing that you've decided is incredibly important. You need to fucking understand that design is a thankless job, because when you do something right, nobody mentions a thing. But the instant that you fuck up, somebody has to jump down your throat, pull out your spleen through your nostrils, and then proclaim that for some reason you only had some weird ideal at heart that had nothing to do with players. The sort of people who say that the decisions that game designers make are designed to fuck with the player base don't understand that the designers have no other mandate other than trying to make sure that the players are happy. And guess what? If a game is free to play, and yeah, we're going to go over here, even though this doesn't necessarily have to do with all of TTRPGs, If something is free to play, the reason why designers are designing it to be free to play is so that they can get paid so they can eat. Because if they don't get paid and they don't eat, the game doesn't exist. So yes, it is to your fucking benefit to have microtransactions, you ungrateful wretches. You know what? While we're talking about game design, fuck, this thing's going to take only about 45 minutes because none of you can even talk back to me because you know that I'm right. LARPing and role-playing in general isn't a goddamn replacement for your social life. And don't come at me with your fucking introvert takes because I'm tired of hearing it. Being an introvert is not a badge of honor, same as being an extrovert. It's just something that you prefer. And you don't deserve special treatment because you happen to like staying at home. You just want to do that. That's all you, and that's all what you're doing. All right? And if you decide that you go out and role play and that's your social life, that's only the first fucking step, motherfucker. You also actually have to talk to people out of game. Maybe the people who are behind the characters that you play with have lives that are interesting that you might even want to interact with. Humans are social creatures. And I know that social stuff isn't always the easiest, but it is the kind of thing that helps keep your brain in working order, however your brain might decide to work. So you should start figuring out that maybe interacting with people in a majority of the way through the guise of another character might not be the healthiest thing for you to fucking do. It's the same reason why actors who show up on set and decide that they're going to only portray their character and never break it are assholes. And they don't deserve awards. Their entire crew around them deserves awards because the only reason why they look good is because everyone else put up with their bullshit. All right? Fuck. So, the next time that you decide to show up to a LARP, or the next time that you decide that the only thing that's worth talking about is the role-playing experience that you had, you need to realize that there is more to life than role-playing. And some people make games for a living, and they still have to talk about other shit. Read a book. Go and watch Game of Thrones or whatever. I don't care, but have something in your life beyond role-playing. Because role-playing can't be the only thing. Escapism is wonderful, but it isn't the only thing. And part of the reason why LARPers have a bad reputation in the media is because they goddamn deserve it. All right? It's not because the entire hobby is flawed. It might not even be a majority of people who are flawed. At the same time, if you decide that you need to interact with the rest of the world as if it's all one giant LARP, you have to understand that the reason that we have civilization is because we've managed to come up with ways and rules and order so that we can all get together and we don't try to slaughter each other at any one point in time. Okay? Carrying around a battle axe does not make you cool. All right, here's something. The term Dungeon Master, it's got to go. And it doesn't even have to go because of the word master, which we've spoken about on this channel. It has to go because Dungeon Master has too much of a tee-hee mentality behind it, and it makes the entire hobby look infantile. All right? Nobody is saying that they're a Dungeon Master without thinking in the back of their head that they're also involved in the BDSM community. And you know what? The BDSM community doesn't need to be tied to you giggling freaks. Okay? It's fine to make sure that the person who is adjudicating the rules has a different title. But Dungeon Master? Does anyone seriously think that Dungeon Master is actually a good thing to call somebody at this point? If I'm calling you a Dungeon Master, I'm hoping it's because you're about to whip me or possibly step on my face with a stiletto heel. It's not because I want you to roll some dice and tell me that a beholder has for some reason created an anti-magic field around me. Yeah, you know what? Old school exists for a reason. It's so that we can learn from the past and move on. All right? I ain't that much younger. And let me tell you, I have to get in with the times. And the times say that Dungeon Master is a term that's got to fucking go. Because at this point, what we're doing is we are deliberately othering ourselves from the rest of the community, creating a niche in which we can feel special. And that's going to make it harder for people to get into the hobby. We're already doing so much to try to get people into role-playing, notably basically by bribing celebrities into playing games so that they can do their shuffle, song, and dance and hope that somebody will be able to watch and be able to say, oh, maybe I'll want to try that. So they might actually go out and buy a book. So what I want is I want people to play the game. And if you say, oh, I want to play, but wait a minute, what are you, a dungeon master? They're going to turn around and they're going to leave, and then they're going to grow up to be the jock that stuffs your head down a toilet. And I'm not saying that that's acceptable behavior, but at the same time, I can understand it. Because dungeon masters, while they don't deserve the shame that they get for being involved in the kink community, they definitely don't deserve to have the shame being involved in the role-playing community as well. We have the ability to come up with better names for all of this stuff. So let's give it a shot, shall we? And while we're at it, let's touch on this too. You know what? Game master, not so great either. Once again, part of the reason why we discussed it is because the term master has some troubling contexts to it, and I get it. And you know what? It might not personally bother me, but if it bothers somebody else at the table, I'll stop fucking using it. But at the same time, the idea that you are the game master, people misinterpret this shit all the time. And it also gives some people swelled ideas in their heads. Just because you're the game master doesn't mean that you're better than everyone else at the table. And yet that title basically implies that you are. People aren't called player masters or character masters. They're just called players. Or they're called, at best, maybe, I don't know, like participants, right? And yet you somehow get to sit on your lofty, exalted throne and lord it over everyone else, claiming that you are the master and that others must somehow defer to you. No, it's not about deference. It's about them granting the consent that you get to make the rules and that they'll abide by them as long as it suits them. Because you don't have mastery over shit. If they decide that they want to stand up and tell their own goddamn stories without you, they can. And you'll be standing there with your genitals in your hands looking like an idiot because you don't know that it was time to stop stroking yourself off and instead maybe pay attention to what your players need for once in your goddamn life. Huh? Fuck. Swear sometimes. All right, here's something else. You dipshits should want to fail way more often. Too many times I'm going to see people who are trying to come up with all these tactics in order to beat scenarios. Fuck, even adventures that are published, modules, 99.9% of them have a win condition to get to the end and actually succeed in the quest. Succeeding in quests can be boring as fuck. Sometimes what's really great is when your character suffers setbacks and yet everything you do is an attempt to struggle against that. Let it go for once in your goddamn life. Make a bad decision on one of your player characters because it's going to serve the story better. While the dice are there to try to make sure that you have that chaos injected, and while yes, it's important for you to hope that your character can strive because that's what we're all supposed to do, and heroes often are attempting to strive more than the average person, you need to fucking deal with the idea that getting an F isn't going to ruin your goddamn life. If your character kicks it because you somehow managed to make that decision for your character, then I applaud you because it means that you have more courage than most people who decide to pick up this hobby. It's time that we realize that failure is the thing that makes success feel good. And if you can't put up with failure, then that's something that's on you because you've decided that your character has to be perfect at all times. Or maybe it isn't just you. Maybe we have too many storytellers who are just a little too hesitant to make things too difficult because they don't want to make their characters fail and therefore have their players cry. Maybe a few player tears are kind of important. Maybe they have to see the dark before the dawn actually matters to them. And if they don't, then that's on them for deciding to create a story that might as well be fit into young adult section of a library. I'm not even talking about good young adult novels. Maybe we're even going all the way back to kindergarten. If you give a player a cookie, then they're going to want to succeed at everything and never roll a failure in their fucking life. Maybe it's okay that the rolls that you make aren't always going to pop up all successes. Maybe it means that getting a critical isn't the best thing that could happen to you at any one point in time. But if you don't ever try, it's not like you'll ever know the joy of realizing that your character's life has turned to shit and that now he has to dig himself out of a hole using a shovel that he made out of his own femur. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Too cowardly. Because your character is also running around making sure that she can succeed at every little thing that she has, that the crowns are all there for the taking, and that the person who stands in the way is nothing more than a symbol to show off how badass your character has become. I'm tired of it. And I'm tired of myself for enabling it. Safety tools are all the rage these days. People are saying that it's one of the most required things that have happened to the role-playing community since it first began. But you know what? Safety tools shouldn't make you feel safe. They should make you safe. Part of the point of safety tools are to make sure that you can stretch, you can move forward and move beyond, so that you can feel a little unbalanced, so that you can feel the emotions of fear and jealousy and excitement and lust and rage. All of those things, safety tools are there to make sure that you can feel those things. If your safety tools are only there to make sure that at every step of the way you feel like you are always safe, that's going to transfer to your characters. The point of a safety net is not so that you look down constantly to see that it's there. It's so that it's there in case you slip and fall. Safety tools are incredibly important and everyone should be using them. But at the same time, we have to recognize that those safety tools need to be there so that we can move without feeling like we're constantly being carried. And now I know that some people are going to come at me and say that now I'm saying that safety tools aren't important. They are. We're developing our own. We're hoping to release it once we can get around to it, once we can actually find the fucking spare time to do that sort of thing. But at the same time, the point of all of this is that if you want to get into a situation where you grow and expand, that is never going to be entirely safe. The safety tools are there to make sure that if you make a mistake or if you slip or if someone else does, then you are not hurt or injured. All right, you fucks. Here it comes. Turns out that if you get to play in your mom's basement, you are actually living the goddamn life. People look down on this as if it's some sort of sign that you can't somehow get out under the yoke of your parents, that it's something to be ashamed of. Do you know how comforting it is to be able to sit down in a place and know that you're in a house with people who care about you and love you, and at the same time are accepting enough of you that you can sit down with some friends and do stuff that they don't understand, that they have no chance to understand because they're not actually interested in going down to learn, but at the same time, they're there to provide you snacks? Get fucking real. It's time for us to not shame people for where they play or how they play. You have Cheeto dust on your hands? That means you got to eat some Cheetos, motherfucker, and that's a pretty good thing to be. I can't eat Cheetos anymore. I wish I could eat Cheetos, but I gotta be careful. Because now it turns out that when you grow up, your body starts fucking up and you break in 800 different places and you have to start paying a whole lot more attention to maintenance if you didn't before. Which means that if you have the privilege of being able to munch down on a Cheeto and that's something that you want to do, then God damn it, you should enjoy that and stop listening to everyone else who tells you that you're doing something wrong. And hey, if Cheetos aren't your thing and you'd rather have something else to eat, go for it. Eat that instead. Are you playing in a place that you don't own? It's fine. The economy sucks and most people can't afford to own their own place anyway. Are you also still playing in your parents' basement? You know what? Yahtzee. It means your parents have a place. It means you get to stay in it and that your parents care about you and that they're still around. Huh? Fuck. Bodies are overrated. Part of the reason why we roleplay is that we don't have to stay into these fucking fleshy sacks that don't pay attention to what we need anymore and that let you down constantly until the day that it stops working, and that your consciousness ascends to a singular point of light, moving past the speed of relativity and into the unknown and beyond. Roleplaying is our attempt to die before we get the chance to reincarnate into something else, something that we've chosen, a life that we think that we'd prefer, one with higher highs and lower lows, one in which we get to be the heroes of our own stories. But we're held back by this cavalcade of calcium and water, carbon, that has nothing to do with anything other than to hold us back. And yet people have the gall to say that somehow moving out the earliest that you possibly can is the best thing for you. Turns out that all our lives are different and all our needs are different. And we can't constantly be fighting amongst ourselves to try to decide who's coming out first in this race. Because it isn't a race. It's not even a sport. It's just existence. And all we want is to experience something that isn't our own dreary lives for a couple of hours at a time. You ever look at your storyteller and wondering why they don't want to run anymore? It's not because they're tired. It's not because they've been doing it for a long time and they want to try something else. It's because they feel an incredible crush of pressure. You want to know why the storyteller is the most important player at your table? And yes, I'm going to say that. Today I'm going to say that the storyteller is the most important. It's not because they know the rules better than you do. It's not because they're more important to the story. It's because they shoulder the most fucking responsibility. And that has to change. Players have to start being responsible for the fun of everyone at the table. But the storytellers don't get to have that option. They must do it. That's their only function and their only purpose. And every single time that they walk away from the table, they're constantly wondering whether or not they managed to maximize the fun of the people who are participating. They don't have to worry about whether or not they ruined the game for everyone else, because they're constantly worrying about whether anything is going wrong. You have to deal with yourself as a player. Your storyteller has to deal with everybody. And it doesn't matter whether they've done it once or a dozen times or a gross number of times or a Google number of times. They're going to be questioning themselves because they've shouldered more responsibility than you have. You have to make sure that you know what's on your sheet, that you know what the rules are, and that you can play your character in such a way that it makes the story better. And they're the ones who have to come and pull the entire rest of the world around you. And that's pressure. And some people enjoy pressure. It crushes them down and it makes them become diamonds. And some people crumble under that pressure. They try running a game once or twice and then they decide that they'll never do it ever again. And some people like pressure the way that we like to take vacation. Just a step away. Going camping. A little bit of roughing it. A little bit of effort put in for a better experience, not just for you, but for the people around you. But they don't do it every goddamn day. They're not the sort of people who the instant that the clock hits 5, they hop into their truck and go out to a campground. They do it maybe once, maybe twice a year. And sometimes they bring along an entire camper worth of stuff to make it easier on them. Your storyteller is important. But it doesn't have to do with the length of time that they've been doing it. It has to do with the responsibilities that they're shouldering. And maybe it's time for you to start thinking about how you can shoulder some of that responsibility as well. That's what we know. But we don't acknowledge it. We don't actually go to the effort of making sure that everybody understands it. And it's time to start. It's time for us to realize that if we do not pay more attention to the pressure that we put upon storytellers, there's a reason why they will stop. But it doesn't mean that we can't let all the pressure off storytellers. This new thing that's happening in role-playing games, where now players are the ones who get to decide the outcome of their roles, where players have more agency in the games themselves. The reason why this is becoming more and more popular is because it makes up for the fact that storytellers don't learn their craft. Storytellers don't learn about things like game pacing or about story structure. And so instead, they're there to make sure that everybody else manages to take up those reins instead. These things are working for some groups, and yet at the same time there's this assumption that that's what every group wants, and it isn't. The amount of agency that players want to have in a game is not always absolute. In much the same way that people who are involved in bondage sometimes want to be tied up because they have control in every other aspect of their lives, and they need to be comforted by the idea that for that one brief shining moment, they're letting somebody else take the wheel, and for fuck's sake, it's not Jesus. Storytellers will adapt to the amount of agency that the players need to have. But game mechanics and game systems can't start taking the tactic that nobody wants to be in charge. Because sometimes that's exactly what people want. Somebody to be in charge so that everybody else can get focused on what they're trying to do for the game. Not everybody can be a leader. Not everybody can be a general. Sometimes what we actually need is for one person to step forward out of the muck, take the vanguard, turn behind them and say, "Follow me." And they do it through mud, over barbed wire, and under shelling until they can get to the point where they stand at the top of a hill and say, "We have captured this flag." What they don't want is for 4, 5, 6 people to stand around looking at each other, wondering in what direction the hill is. I've got one more prepared hot take, which means that you're going to have to start coming up with some of your own, or I'm going to have to start going on improv on this one. But here it is. Get ready. It turns out, everybody, D&D is actually a good game, you elitist fucks. The number of times that I see people taking D&D to task on Twitter appalls me, because that's not the way we want to see this hobby go. Because for every time that you say that D&D isn't actually a good game, what you're actually doing is you're telling somebody else who really enjoys that game that they're not doing it right. You're gatekeeping. Dungeons & Dragons is a fine game. It isn't necessarily the game for everybody, and we can object to the idea that D&D describes himself as the world's greatest role-playing game. But what we can't do is deny its undeniable effect that it has on the hobby as a whole, and the fact that it is the progenitor for most organized role-playing afterwards. D&D is fine. And you know what? D&D is fine whether you decide to play it rules as written, or whether you use it as a very, very loose framework so that you can tell stories that have almost nothing to do with what's described in the books. Both ways are valid and all ways in between. But you have to stop shitting on D&D because you've discovered an independent role-playing game that's just as insufferable as somebody who says that that popular music isn't any good because it, for some reason, is more manufactured than other music. There's a reason why popular music is popular, because people actually like to listen to it. There's a reason why people play D&D, because it's a good game that gives people the tools that they need to tell stories that otherwise they never would have even contemplated. And we don't give that enough credit. Yes, D&D has a lot of problems that hopefully it's addressing. And yes, some of the problems that D&D is addressing just aren't being addressed as quickly as we'd like, or not to the extent that we would prefer. And that's fine. One day there will be a D&D 6th edition, and we'll see what kind of changes they make then. It will constantly be evolving for as long as it decides to be a product that's available to be sold. If they're smart, and at Wizards of the Coast I have to assume that they are, they'll understand that this is an evergreen product as long as they keep updating it. And because they keep updating it, it's a game that's worth your attention and time. You don't have to play it, but you got to be aware that it isn't something to be avoided at all costs just because it's mainstream. And yes, for the first time, Dungeons & Dragons is about the equivalent of mainstream as you can get. And that doesn't make it bad. The number of times that I've seen people bag on popular music and then 20 years later look back and say, no, it turns out they were actually really good. Yes, but they were really good back then. The only reason why you're looking back on it is because it stood the test of time, and now you feel embarrassed that you dissed it when it was first around because you thought that somehow it would make you look cooler by comparison. You do not have to put D&D down to bring other role-playing games up. And the fact that you keep doing that is embarrassing. It's embarrassing to me, and it's embarrassing to everybody else out there. So, pick the games that you want to play. Evangelize for them. Get other people to try them out. See if you can support the developers in any way that you feel that you can, whatever's reasonable to you. And if you decide that Dungeons & Dragons isn't one of those games, that's fine. But stop trying to pretend like it's some kind of evil, dangerous thing, or that people who play it are somehow lesser, or that for some reason the fact that it's the role-playing game that most people recognize is somehow a blight on our society. It's not. The blight on our society is elitism and gatekeeping, and it's something that I see that's all too common, which is why hot takes are sometimes the worst thing that you can engage in. They're fun. They're definitely fun. And we enjoy doing it. But at the same time, the problem with a hot take is that it brings you forward in such a way that you appear aggressive and that you're stating with authority. And authority is the dangerous thing. I am not an authority on your fun. I am not the person who gets to decide whether you enjoy something or not. If my opinions differ from yours, that means only that you and I have one thing that we do not have in common. I am not right. I'm not right about any of the things that we discussed today. They're just opinions. They're just hot takes. And hot takes are fine and fun. But at the same time, we cannot give in to hot takes as a reasonable expression of fact. The reason why they're hot also is because they sometimes go against the grain. Going against the grain doesn't make you right. And it never will. Not on its own. Not by default. Being right is a lot more complicated than that. Pukajutsu has a hot take. Here, we'll start calling them up here. All those bad character tropes we covered are also welcome tropes. No one's fun is wrong. I will cycle back around with another hot take that involves that. And I will say that yes, your fun can be wrong if it prevents other people from having fun. And you agreed to let them have fun. You want to sit at home and pretend that you're an edgy assassin? Go right ahead. Like, that's fine. No one's stopping you. But if you show up to my game and you wreck everyone else's fun by being an edgy assassin, then we have a problem. We got to deal with it. But you're absolutely right. Tropes in and of themselves aren't necessarily wrong. They're cautions. Cautions that we have to look out for. Hot take against my own opinions? Anytime I can. I'm not nearly adjusted well enough to be so self-secured in my own opinions. All right, let's see what Requiem has to say here. Not good at hot takes, but I'll give it a shot. Players that demand their storytellers to be like Matt Mercer. Not sure that hot take. Maybe lukewarm at best. It's hot for me, though. Around here, it's decidedly lukewarm, but it can be hot in other areas. Matt Mercer as a storyteller is great for his group and for what they're trying to do and the kind of show that they put on. But for you, it might be awful. And he's the first person who will tell you that. He's actually, as far as I can tell, disappointed that people hold him in such high esteem because they hold him in such high esteem that then they believe that there's no way that they can possibly match his greatness, and so they don't even try. And I genuinely think that probably rattles him quite a bit. I mean, who am I to speak about Matt Mercer? But he has in the past stated that he suffers from imposter syndrome himself. And this doesn't make it better to be held as this lofty goal, because he also sees all of his mistakes. He sees all the places where he fails. So there are things that we have to consider along these lines. Whew. Hot takes, man. They take it out of you. Like that was a lot to throw down in a short period of time. What other hot takes can we have here? What else can we see and react to? What do we have? What do your elven eyes see? Might need to hydrate to help quell that fire. Well, I've already done that to the best of my ability, but that's all that's left. I'm really glad I didn't just pour that all over my keyboard. But that's life. It's life in the fast lane. The problem, of course, when I also kind of examine hot takes is that I ain't shit either, right? Like, as much as I enjoy doing what we do, and as much as we try our best to put on a good show, we clearly aren't. We're clearly deficient in a lot of ways, not the least of which is the way that we play, but the most deficient we're in is also that we choose not to attempt to market this all that heavily. We don't go to a huge degree to try to reach out to bring in new viewers. We just try to do the best with what we have and make sure that we still have fun. That's kind of like where we're at. So Matt Mercer and his game has kind of evolved to the point where it is designed to be a mass consumed product. But if there's a lukewarm take that I can offer on my own, I don't really enjoy watching other people roleplay all that much. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll watch and it'll be interesting. But established like tabletop role-playing, that's less of a thing that I'm focused on. It is an issue, but it's something that we have to just handle. Oh, I think Elizabeth's got a pretty good point. Let's see what it says. Hot take: learning systems through PDFs suck. I hope the future holds better digital interfaces to learn systems that aren't just tiny scanned words on a screen. Yeah, even though a lot of PDFs these days aren't necessarily just straight up scans, they are in fact digital documents with searchable text and with hyperlinks and all that. Reading PDFs just doesn't have the same kind of appeal or effect as reading a book. But we also have started to lose our ability to handle books that well. I had to get rid of a lot of my books because I just was moving around too much and they were just too heavy to carry. And I also realized that a lot of those books are books that I was never going to read again or only look at sparingly. And I thought that others may enjoy it more. And dealing with people who are elitist about books is also an issue. But yeah, reading PDFs is kind of lame. It's kind of lame. So it is also one of the things that we touched upon earlier, the idea of print layout. Books that have important rules in the most obscure places tend to be frustrating, and sometimes people just house rule things before finding the real rule because it just takes too long to find the rule. Some of that has to do with books and some of it has to do with game design itself. If a rule is critical, but it only applies in certain edge cases, then maybe you needed to phrase the other rules so that that edge case disappeared or was no longer relevant. But it's hard. It's hard to fix that. In other words, Shadowrun, yeah. And hi, it's good to see you. Is battle done? Your peasant railgun makes you a terrible person to play with. But railguns. Yeah, I would be interested to see role-playing games being designed in ways that the information can be absorbed in a different way than just a straight-up manual. A good tutorial, right? Like something like that. It would be nice to see. The idea of making a role-playing game that people can play with, that the rule books, instead of them being just printed material, that maybe you learn through a point-and-click interface in a Unity-developed environment, or maybe they're a combination of written materials and PowerPoint slides and videos and virtual reality. I don't know. But it is something that I think that we can look at and appreciate, because there are different ways to learn. Not everybody is a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner. Kinesthetic learning, by the way, is learning by doing. So it is a thing that exists. And yeah, Fate Core did an okay job of it. Of course, you have to like Fate Core. The concept of games being tied to books is something that we might need to take a look at, because one of the things that I know is that here, I'll give you an example. A game that I don't play anymore, but Magic the Gathering. If you want to take, you know what? I'm actually going to get this information for you right now. At one point, a long time ago, I was looking into potentially becoming a judge for Magic the Gathering. Not because I played, but because I wanted to support my local gaming store. They were looking at running more events, but they would need to have a judge, and I wanted to see what it would take to do that. And it was a thing that I abandoned eventually, because quite honestly, I don't care about Magic that much, and the main reason why I abandoned it is that the store closed. But if you look at the rule book for Magic the Gathering, the comprehensive rules, there are 256 pages. And the number of people who have actually read the comprehensive rules for Magic the Gathering is next to zero, because the comprehensive rules aren't actually that important for knowing how to play the game. They're very important for dealing with edge cases. Edge cases are those things that don't come up all the time, but they're little exceptions, and even though one individual exception might not happen all that often, exceptions happen all the time. And this rulebook is designed to be a way to have a definitive, this is what the rules actually mean, without any vagueness. And it is a masterful document if you read it. It is intended to do one thing very, very well, which is be clear about what the rules mean in this situation. Unfortunately, it's verbose as fuck, so it's impenetrable. And in a lot of ways, that's what a lot of role-playing games are like. I say that this is a 256-page document and call that ridiculous, and at the same time, I could point to the Exalted 3rd Edition Core with its 600-plus pages and say that it is equally ridiculous. And it is also way too much information to somebody to scan and memorize and understand without that being a job for them. So, what do? We find better ways to learn games, and sometimes that might not be writing. So I agree with you, Elizabeth. I think that would be a great thing for us to look into, is when we are trying to learn games, how can we do that in a way that we can truly have somebody appreciate the role-playing experience without having their only resources either be other players who may not be the best teachers themselves or a rulebook. Especially that now rulebooks are often things that are displayed on screens, which do not always make for great reading. I mean, look, I will tell you that I love being able to pick up a tablet and have access to a lot of books in something that doesn't weigh a whole lot and that I can run a search through. Like, that's great. And it is handy. It's about the size of a page, but at the same time, it doesn't have the same experience. It's sort of like the dice that we were talking about earlier. There is something awfully satisfying about picking up dice and being able to shake them around in your hands and roll them. So, publishing video guides and interactive tutorials is probably too much to expect from every indie RPG, but it'd be nice to see more of them. Heck, I want to see these sorts of things come out for mainstream games because I don't see great examples of them yet. I know that there are some people who go to great efforts to try to show how to plays online. You say that there's plenty for D&D, and yet, like, the problem is that it's such a vast thing. I want a first-time user experience that is common and distilled and excellent for everybody, that isn't reliant on just one media. And I don't have that yet, but what I'm asking for is also incredibly complicated. First-time user experiences are some of the hardest things that you'll design in games, whether that's a video game, a board game, a role-playing game, or whatever, because you essentially have to convince somebody in a very short amount of time that your game is worth paying attention to. And that's not always an easy thing to do. So it is rough. Some of my favorite board games that I've ever played are games that are quite complicated. And being able to learn how to play those games is rough. More and more games these days are actually saying, don't read our rules. We've included the rule book, but go online and watch this video instead. It's a better way to learn. But that also assumes that you will learn better by doing that. One of the best first-time user experiences that I've experienced in games recently is actually the board game Fog of Love, which has a wonderful tutorial. And that tutorial is built into you playing the game itself, and you can assemble it once again if you decide to pass the game on to somebody else. You can reset the whole damn thing. It's marvelous. But not every game has this. But that first-time user experience is critical. It's part of the reason why some of my favorite games are games that don't do as well, because they don't have a great FTUE. I remember when I first got into Android Netrunner, I had heard amazing things about this game, but it wasn't until I sat down and I watched a 20-minute YouTube video that I could get it, that I could kind of wrap my head around it and understand. And that video was very well produced. It was Fantasy Flight Games, and they do very well at producing things that aren't just written material. But we don't really have a lot of that for role-playing games these days, so we need to do better. We hopefully can do better. I shouldn't say need. Need implies that, like, if we don't do that, everything will fail, and clearly that's not the case. But I think that it is definitely an area that we can look into, that we can examine and see if we can do better. And as much as I don't like Magic the Gathering, and as much as I think that it is a game that carries a legacy that has so many endemic flaws that it won't rise above other more modern games, it's still the most popular game out there, and it still does really well. And part of that is because they do manage to keep that game fresh, so it helps. It helps a lot. Battleoos misses the hot takes, well, misses the opening hour of hot take salvo. Where I was being a lot more aggressive than I am now. Ooh, okay, I like this one. Hot take. A session doesn't have to be funny to be enjoyable. Stop trying to joke every 5 minutes. Depends on the game that you're playing, but no, in general, role-playing games don't need to be anything to be enjoyable. But trying to force something definitely is a way to make sure that you're going to make it harder for everybody to have a good time. It is something that actually turns me off of a lot of watching people role play. And I see this because I go on Twitch streams and I will watch random Twitch streams, partially because I want to see if there's anything that we're not doing that we could do better. Sometimes the best way to learn that is to scope other people out and see what they're doing. I'm not calling it competition because I don't really think we're competing for viewers. Again, we're not really ever focusing on like user outreach to a certain degree. We kind of like that our community is a slow growth and wax and wane. But one thing that really bothers me when I see people play is that you often have a joker at the table. Devil's Luck Gaming, I'll have a look at them. I appreciate you dropping that in. I'll see, because I don't think I've actually caught one of their streams yet. So let me toss that in. And the problem that I have with jokers is that they often, they're not trying to say this, they're not attempting to be this kind of jerk, but what they're actually doing is they're saying, you're not paying enough attention to me. Every time you make a joke, you are at least in part saying, I want you to understand how clever I am. I want you to pay attention to me and acknowledge the fact that I am entertaining you. And oftentimes, jokers at a table tend to be white dudes. I see, I am making a generalization, but it is a generalization that I think is worth noting. And it is deeply ironic in some ways, because I realize that clinic hours most of the time is literally a white dude just shouting his opinion into the ether. But they're white dudes who somebody else is playing, and then they're like, but I have a joke. I have to cut in. I got to make a comment. I got to say something. I can't let anybody else say anything unless we've also heard from me, the white dude. And it's noticeable if you're looking for it, and if you're not looking for it, even if it's not necessarily like something that springs out, I bet your subconscious does. And it's kind of horrible to watch it like that. You can do better than constantly creating a joke. Here's the thing. I think I've mentioned this in clinic hours before. When I had a very short-lived career as a debater, right? I was on the debate team in high school because they basically forced me to. There weren't enough people. They needed more people on the team, and they were like, you, do this. And I was like, but I don't want to. And they were like, just try it, do it. And I was like, okay, because I was a kid and I didn't know any better. But I quit because I was like, I did not find it fun. I didn't find it that interesting. I was good at it, but I wasn't interested in it at all. But one of the things that in parliamentary debate that you are allowed to do is you're allowed to heckle. If somebody else is making a speech and you have a really, really witty and incisive comment to make, you can make it. And the number one thing that a debate coach will tell you when you're starting out is never heckle. Because while it is still within the rules, nobody does it well, or at least very, very few people do it well. And I tend to agree that maybe the jokes that you're making don't necessarily have to be said out loud. Because there is a big difference between you telling a joke because the table enjoys it and everybody gets a laugh out of it, and you telling a joke because you're trying to prove that you're funny or you're trying to get people to pay attention to you. And they don't need to. Not all the time. Sometimes you're going to have a wonderful observation to make or a killer joke. But if you've been making lukewarm or shitty observations and jokes for the past 2 hours, they've already tuned you out. And that one joke that is going to land and would have brought the house down won't, because they've already decided that you're not worth listening to. And I can't count how many times I've been watching people play where they're getting really excited and they're getting really engaged with the game, and then they say something and then they take half a second to breathe, and then somebody else cuts in and you can watch them deflate because they were on a roll and you took that from them because you needed to be paid attention to in that moment. And funnily enough, it often isn't the storyteller, but it's a player who does this. Storytellers maybe don't have to worry about doing this as much because they often have the attention of the players, so they don't feel the need to assert themselves in it as much. That's just a theory that I have. But, shut the fuck up. And part of the reason why I like playing with a small group is that then these sorts of jokes can happen because everybody can participate. When it's a group of 6, if everybody's a joker, the game doesn't go anywhere. But you're more likely to have that one player who decides that for the good of the group, they need to listen to him. You have a small group, and then those jokes can be made, and like you can easily tailor them to make sure that everybody at the table can appreciate it instead of 1 or 2. It's a personal preference thing. But fucking jokes, man. Shut the fuck up. Seriously. It's almost as annoying as somebody trying to come up and play your character for you, because you are just still stealing the spotlight. So cut that shit out. And if you find yourself doing this in your games, really evaluate it. Try to figure out whether or not you are making everyone else's game just a little bit less pleasant. And it's not good enough to ask them, because if you ask them, you cannot guarantee that they will give you an honest answer. Because if you're already somebody who's yammering a lot and just spewing jokes or comments all the time, you're not letting them get a word in edgewise then. Why would they possibly think that that you'd want them to get a word in edgewise now? So no, don't bother. Figure it out yourself. You can ask if you want, but you can trust your gut on this one. You can really feel it in here. You'll know. And when you'll know, you can start to adjust your behavior. That is one of the things that I notice in other streams that I can't stand. It's something that I'm always worried that I might do. So I try to keep an eye on it. I'll also point out that making a mistake isn't a permanent thing, right? If you make a few too many jokes one session, it's not like you're a bad role player. One of the things that I'll say whenever I do things like hot takes, or whenever I am critical of a certain gameplay pattern, I always get messages from people who say, but I do this and it's okay. Or people who message me and say, but I do this, am I an asshole? And usually the answer is no. The problem is when somebody does things repeatedly over and over again. That's when it's an issue. Or if you're experienced and you do something, but you understand the effects of it, and so you do it at the appropriate time, then no, you're not a problem. And I'm not trying to call anybody out specifically. If I needed to call you out specifically, I will. I will message you and I will tell you. It would be an incredibly shitty thing of me to call people out anonymously on clinic hours when I could contact you directly. So... yeah, the problem with endless puns is that it is always, at least in part, a pay attention to me moment. And puns might be great, but like one really good pun in a session is way better than 50 really bad puns in a session. Or one really good pun is better than one really good pun and 49 mediocre puns. Resist the urge. Resist the urge. Especially if it's a joke that everybody sees coming. So it's kind of like the "that's what she said" phenomenon, right? That joke is a really easy joke to make. Somebody says something, you say, "That's what she said," and everybody laughs. Okay, that's great. Like that's fine, I guess, right? But if you make the "that's what she said" joke all the time, eventually other people are going to say something and then immediately think he's going to say "that's what she said," and it won't be as funny anymore. Or they'll start making the joke at the same time as well. So if it always comes up, if that joke is always happening, then that can be an issue. Plus, maybe that moment will come up in an area where that joke would be entirely inappropriate, right? If you're involved in a scene where you're staring across the table at somebody and that person is near tears and you're near tears because two characters are saying goodbye to each other, and somebody looks into the other's eyes and says, "I'll always come for you," and then the person to your right starts to giggle, and then they're like, "That's what she said." Bah! Well, you just fucking ruined that moment for them because they said something that could be interpreted in a suggestive fashion. What a crime. So you got to be careful about encouraging that kind of behavior at the table. Jokes are great. I love jokes. I love out-of-character jokes. I love out-of-character banter because I can also trust my players to stop when it's appropriate. And if your players can't be trusted to do that, you got to put that behavior on lock. You got to figure that shit out, because otherwise you will get that moment, perfect moment, ruined because somebody didn't learn that it wasn't appropriate to do that. Yeah, well, That's What She Said doesn't have as nearly as much of a popularity since The Office went off air. But Real Brick Wall mentions, I think D's Nuts is starting to overtake That's What She Said, for better or for worse. Yeah, it's true. But like a good D's Nuts joke can like totally make people laugh. But just pick your battles. Pick your battles. Thanks for showing up, Spardon. Like I appreciate having you here and really appreciated the comments. D's Nuts usually requires an intentional bait and setup. See, the thing is, like, really clever D's Nuts jokes comes at a moment where it wasn't expected and that you noticed an entry for it instead of setting it up. But Requiem says, I will say cracking a joke when the storyteller or other players trying to be serious during a serious moment can annoy me, but it can also break the tension for a moment and let everyone take a much needed breath. It's a fine line. You're absolutely right. There are times where cracking a joke can help break tension, a tension that needs to be broken. But that's such a delicate situation to be in that if you're making these jokes constantly over and 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 over in a session, I don't trust you to know where that line is, because you're just making the joke too many times. If you're the sort of person who makes jokes sparingly and makes those jokes count when they count, then I trust that in a moment where tensions are running high and you crack a joke and everybody laughs, that it will be appropriate at that time. I'll also say that these are more tips for when you're dealing with players who you aren't extremely close with, which honestly can be a lot of you. You can be really good friends with your gaming buddies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're very close to them. I am close to my players, or at least the players that I play with here on RPGClinic, and so we are like pretty good judges of each other's, limits and sensibilities and stuff like that. We still may sometimes get them wrong, but you will naturally get better at things. The thing is, there will always be exceptions to the rule. Always. There will always be but sometimes it's okay. Yes, of course. Always there will be times that it's okay. And I don't mean to imply that anything that I say is an absolute hard and fast rule, other than very few exceptions, but most of those involve safety. But yeah, like if I don't trust you then saying, well, sometimes it works. Yeah, but I don't trust you now. There is a certain amount of sensitivity that we also have to look at. Here's a hot take that involves the industry that I'm in. You also have to be willing to forgive. I'm not saying you have to forgive, but I'm saying that the possibility of forgiveness has to be there. Because if it isn't, you run into a problem. If you have somebody who constantly cracks jokes all the time at the table, and then you tell them to knock it off, but then anytime they crack any joke, you're like, you're starting again. But then you let other players crack jokes instead, you're not really doing anyone any favors. This is the sort of thing that's happening a lot recently as we are shining more and more light on unacceptable behavior, and I think that's incredibly important. I believe that we should be shining lights on unacceptable behavior, but I also believe that we have to be a little more, we have to be a little careful with our reactions to it. We absolutely have to call people to task. People who are wrongdoers absolutely need to be removed from places of power. But people also need to have the opportunity to learn where they did not learn before, have to have the opportunity to rehabilitate if they can be rehabilitated, and to prove that they're worthy of forgiveness if they are indeed worthy of forgiveness. And it stretches across a whole lot of things, but knee-jerk reactions of, oh, it's not a big deal, are awful because it minimizes the stories of those who have been wronged. But also knee-jerk reactions of burn it all down to the ground, never, ever, ever put up with any of this kind of behavior again, isn't actually going to help anybody either. If it's just absolutes, because absolutes don't encourage an improvement. What it will encourage is for people to hide their wrongdoing better instead of just changing what they are. Because if they assume that they've already committed a crime and there's no way for them to ever, if they're caught, that there's no way for them to ever regain the good graces of the crowd, all they'll do is double down on hiding getting caught. They won't actually try to be better. So it is a very tricky situation to be in. And also this kind of ties into role-playing, because there are times where I've seen people who say, do not support this game because there are people who are involved in this game who are bad, and you should not support them financially. This is a legitimate thing to say. I'm not going to say that if you've decided that you don't want to support a company, I'm not saying that you're a bad person for making that decision. But I will say that you got to be a little more aware of that decision and why you're making it, because oftentimes you might be ostensibly punishing one person when you are in fact punishing way more than that one person who don't necessarily deserve that punishment. If it is a natural human thing, like that's totally fine. I don't expect some people, like sometimes you'll encounter something and be like, I just can't handle it anymore. And like, that's okay. It's totally fine. Right. Like I think that I would have difficulty watching a Kevin Spacey movie, and I feel kind of badly about that. Not because I think that Kevin Spacey is a good guy. I don't think he is, but because I also know that hundreds of other people have worked on his projects and they don't necessarily deserve to have their work chucked out because of one bad guy who got caught. You can say, I won't ever buy this company's products again because I don't like how upper management treated their employees. And yet you also don't do exhaustive audits of how every other company treats their employees. The number of people who are like, oh, well, this company has, has been outed as a wrongdoer. And then they run off and they, buy stuff at Walmart and Amazon, and then they order pizza from Domino's Pizza, despite the fact that the CEO of Domino's Pizza has some questionable fringe beliefs himself, and that because they just don't know about those or they're willing to turn a blind eye, it's difficult. So the point is that we have to hold people accountable, and we have to do better. We have to put the systems in so that things can go better. But to just immediately say, nope, and we're never dealing with them again, and nor will we ever listen to them, and no matter what they say, they are evil in our eyes, will not actually help fix the problem. You shouldn't order Papa John's, not because of the weird racist guy, because their pizza is bad. I don't think I've ever had a Papa John's that wasn't at least edible. Well, anyway. But yeah, so that's actually a true hot take that I suppose I'm putting out today. In no way am I trying to make a comment on any current event at this point, other than to say, remember that there's more people who are affected than the wrongdoers, and that doesn't mean the wrongdoers should get away with it, but it is worth thinking about. That's all. The wrongdoers deserve to be exposed. But let's not scorch the earth. Nixon Cuts says, my high school friends were maybe 80% inappropriate behavior. We tried to derail the campaign. The GM tried to herd cats. I mean, yeah, but you're also in high school. And high school is kind of a place where you're going to fuck up. I know I fucked up a lot in a lot of ways. I'm going to put you on pause for a second here, folks. Give me one moment here. So my apologies. I should point out that I am waiting on some news. It's good news, but I am waiting on some news, so that's why I will take phone calls right now. Normally I wouldn't while streaming. You don't deserve to have me interrupted just because of that, but it is a thing that it is time sensitive, so it is just something that I'm paying attention to. But don't worry, nothing bad. Man, the thing is, it sometimes feels like as I grow older, I look back at the mistakes that I made and say, I'm glad I don't make those mistakes. And then it makes me realize that I'm making mistakes right now that I don't even recognize. And I'll only recognize when I get even further older than I am now. So it's kind of a scary thing for me to just deal with and experience. But that's kind of what we have to deal with, right? We can't always be perfect as much as we'd like to be. But at any rate, I think my high school years should be renamed 3 years I fucked up over and over again. My high school covered 10th to 12th grade. I know that's not the norm in most American schools. Hey, I don't think a lot of North American schools agree. I grew up in Quebec. Quebec high school is technically from 7th grade to 11th grade. I don't think any other province in the country stops high school at 11th grade. I think they move on to 12th grade at least, if not 13th in some cases. So don't worry. Everybody's school is different. Fucking up is the kind of thing that we have to be able to let ourselves do. Let's just try to not hurt anyone along the way. And those we do hurt, let's try to make sure that we make things right. That is something about forgiveness, right? Somebody who does not earn forgiveness does not deserve it. And earning forgiveness the onus is on the offender. That's where the forgiveness needs to come from. It's not up to the victim to figure out how somebody needs to make up for things. It's up to the offender to try and figure it out, and for the victim to forgive or not. So Pook brings this up, and I think it's a very good thing to throw out there. It'd be great to never make mistakes, but I think what's more important is how you move forward from them. I completely agree. And one of the examples is pronoun use. A recent kind of minefield for some is that if you mispronounce somebody, so somebody who, for instance, would prefer that you use they, them, and you refer to that person as he or she, making a huge deal out of the mistake and being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe that I did that. Oh, wow. This is so horrible. I shouldn't have done that. I've wronged you somehow. And I can't, I feel so bad. What you're doing is drawing attention to the thing that makes them uncomfortable and just upping up the ante, and then also making it about you. Just be like, oh yeah, sorry, they, anyway, and make an effort. You'll probably make the mistake again. But that's because we're used to using he or she. We're learning, and learning takes time. So, yeah, make a mistake and then move forward from them. But also just make sure that when you are seeking forgiveness, that you don't make yourself appear to be the wronged party, because that's no good either. It's not worth it. But also, if you've wronged somebody in a minor way and that person decides to take it in a completely overblown fashion, then consider that maybe they have only earned a certain amount of contrition from you in the first place. It is an issue in our society and in the circles that I run in, like, because also I have to be aware that if you live in a bubble, that bubble seems to be more and more right and everyone else seems to be wrong. So you have to try to keep yourself exposed. I'm not saying that cancel culture is a problem. That's not what I'm talking about. Outrage culture is something that we need to be worried about just a little bit. You are correct. If you are offended, you are allowed to be offended and you're allowed to state you're being offended and you're allowed to make other people recognize that offending you is wrong. But if you also decide that you're going to blow everything out of proportion all the time, then it gives people less of a reason to try to get along with you. Instead, they just shut you out. And even people who are sympathetic to your cause eventually will stop listening to you if every little infraction ends up being a critical moment in your lifetime. So Requiem says, forgiveness and respect are earned, not given. Still treat people with respect, but if they have not earned it, you don't have to respect them as a person. I think that everybody is due a certain amount of respect. In much the same way that, like, if I meet somebody who I think is a horrible person, I still believe that they should be treated in certain ways, right? Like, I don't think that if somebody is mean, then they deserve to have their head kicked in. Like, I will still respect them enough for that I won't just kick their head in. If somebody is a mass murderer, then I might kill them to prevent other people from dying in that moment, but I'm not going to torture them for the next 8 weeks because I believe that there's a certain amount of respect that's due there too. So I guess I'm just arguing semantics with you at this point, but respect is something that people need to have. The trick is how much you owe them your obedience or your generosity. That's what I think is, because giving somebody your attention is generosity in a certain way, right? But yeah, I just want people to feel like they're, I want people to feel like they're, that they're able to stand up for themselves. And I think that that's incredibly important no matter what. Like, I feel like I have to restate this because somebody out there is going to take this and use it as a way to say that they're correct, and I want to make sure that they don't. In no way am I saying that the crimes that are now people are bringing to light, things like sexual harassment or things like racism or things like et cetera, they're all awful. They do not I am not saying that these things should not be absolutely spotlighted and rooted out and destroyed. So, absolutely. But we can do that in ways that perhaps involve a little more nuance. But they definitely need to be destroyed. Like fuck Nazis, right? Like, Nazis are horrible. You don't have to give Nazis the time of day. You don't have to let Nazis speak their horrible, horrible rhetoric. You don't. You don't have to. You just don't. Anyway, I guess now we're way off topic. We can pull it back to some other hot takes if anybody has any. I'll also point out that you are listening to the wrong fucking guy if you need takes on this, because I am the definition of the oppressor. I am a straight, white, cisgendered, able-bodied male from North America. Like, ugh. Go listen to somebody else. Hello and goodbye, Trey Dog. Hello and goodbye. Whew. It does take a lot out of you when you're just doing hot takes, and serious conversation follows the hot takes, right? Like it's a thing. It's a rough one. Anyway. Yeah. One of the things that I also have to remind people is that we did not play Exalt Witch Academy last Sunday. And we did not play because one of our players just wasn't feeling well, which is a completely legitimate reason not to play. And we're performers at heart. And one of the things that we struggle against, performers, or at least entertainers, I should say. Kate isn't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily define herself as a performer, but she's definitely still in the entertainment industry, in the theater industry. And one of the things that's kind of drilled into us is the whole, like, the show must go on, and we want it to go on. So we sometimes have to fight against this concept of, well, we got to suffer through it. We just got to play because that's the way it is. There are certain sacrifices that I'm totally willing to make, being like my Sunday evenings. That's when I game. And I don't schedule other things at that time. That's legit. It's totally legit. But we also have to recognize that sometimes, we're like, look, it is just a game. This isn't our job, as it were. So, I'm very, very happy that I have players who are willing and able to defeat that inner, I gotta play. I can't let anybody down, and standing up for themselves. Please stand up for yourselves when it comes to your games. If you, as much as I'm like, yes, make a schedule and stick to it and prioritize the game, because if you don't prioritize the game, it won't happen. If you do not feel up to playing for whatever reason, physical, mental, emotional, or whatever, stand up for yourself and don't let anybody bully you into playing if you don't want to play. I am incredibly grateful also that when my player decided to make the call, because we essentially said, look, if you feel that you want to play, we'll play. If you don't feel you want to play, we won't. We left the call in that player's hands. After reassuring that no matter what, we were going to be fine. But I also really appreciate that that call was made well in advance, so that people, like, as much in advance as was possible. Obviously, if you're ready to play, but 2 minutes before you start playing, you just start projectile vomiting everywhere, then yeah, like, obviously at that point, like, you're not doing anything wrong by walking out of game. But it was just really nice to have that as much in advance as possible. That's just a scheduling rule that I'll point out, is just, it's really, really nice when somebody can come in and be like, I know the schedule has to change, and I'm telling you as early as I can. So, as Elizabeth is saying here, if I'd forced myself to play, I wouldn't have been having fun. And since this is a game, fun is a priority. See, exactly, right? This is not our job. We're playing to have fun. We're glad that we get to have fun with all of you. That's what makes it more fun for us. But it is a job. It is a game. It's not a job. So I just did want to bring that up as something that I really appreciated from my players this past week, was that everybody was supportive of players advocating for themselves. And that is without a doubt one of the greatest privileges that I have, is that I have players who look out for each other. Because remember, and this isn't even a hot take, because this is just the only take, everybody's fun, not just your own. I also have a player who, like, comes and gives me extra water when I clearly haven't taken enough water. So that happens. Momentarily felt like a pupper getting ear scratches there. Well, that's awesome. I would like to think that a pupper getting ear scratches feels pretty good. I also and I have to extend that not just to my players, but also to the community. Nobody in the community came up afterwards and been like, I fucking planned my day around this, and now you're not playing, and I hate you, and I'm canceling all of my everythings, and I'm unfollowing you. Like, nobody did that, and I'm super happy about that. You were all, the messages that I saw were universally supportive, and that's also something that I really appreciate, because that's what the kind of thing that I want everyone to feel. I mean, I think that we all would have preferred to play, because we all also would have preferred that there not be any health concerns. And it wasn't even really like, also, it wasn't so much a concern. Elizabeth was quite open about how she was feeling, and we knew that it was going to be temporary. But everyone is also made us feel great about it. And that is awesome. You just watched Ray fighting Ember instead. Whoa! Deep fucking cuts. And we were so young back then. We were so tiny. But that's the way it goes, right? Are there any other hot takes out there that people want to let loose? We're still down for some hot takes, lukewarm takes, tepid takes, sauna takes, dry sauna, wet sauna, humid sauna. There's a sauna in this building, and we haven't been able to use it yet. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Like, saunas are this kind of thing that I think like, oh yeah, this is going to be fun. And then I get in and I'm a gigantic wuss, and I'm like, I'm too fucking hot, and I leave. Tepid takes. Hey, there we go. Here we go. Here we go with a lukewarm take from Pukajutsu. I haven't even read it, but I'm putting it on the screen. Hey, so like lukewarm take, I really respect y'all, and you've quickly become, god damn it. Fuck. Oh, I haven't even looked at it, but it's about me. And you've quickly become my first stop when I want to talk about TTRPGs with people who will actually have a measured approach that I respect. Ice cold takes. Ice cold takes are just universally accepted truths that nobody needs to... Well, actually, an ice cold take is just a wrong take that isn't even backed up properly. I'm not sure. What is an ice cold take? Role-playing is fun, and it's meant to be fun, and part of the fun is discussing it. Part of the fun is kind of going over things after the fact. So it's there. Oh, here we go. This looks like a take that was illustrating my last hottest take, but we'll call it up and have a look. My take, the hate for 5th edition and the hate for people playing 5th edition as their first game is way overblown. The best first TTRPG is the one that you start playing. Doesn't matter what that is. Hard agree on that one. As I was saying earlier, 5th edition is a good game. It is a good game. There's nothing wrong with playing it, and it's nothing wrong with cutting your teeth on it. And there's nothing wrong with playing that, even if your style of game might be better suited to another system or another setting. The point is that you're playing. That's the important part. That's the better part. That's what I want. Except for maybe Fatal. Well, Fatal is a troll. I don't even know if that can be qualified as a game. 5th edition is the best D&D that has ever been. Also, edition wars are dumb. Yeah, I definitely believe that 5th edition is the best overall. I do think that 4th edition has some wonderful bits to it, and there are parts of that I miss. And I never thought I'd say that, because I was like, well, this is just like a fucking MMO. But like, it turned out that was also a lot of fun if you got the right group for it. But 5th edition is the best edition. It is the edition that I would definitely use to introduce somebody to things if I had to introduce somebody to it and I didn't know anything about them first. But as BBC's DeBomb is mentioning here, yeah, 4th edition is so different. It kind of doesn't, even though it's ostensibly set in the same kind of universe with the same classes and all that, 4th edition is just a very different kind of game. And for some people, they might want to appreciate and play that more. But I will go out on a limb and say that 5th edition is just straight up better. It iterates on the other editions of D&D to the point where it is the one that you should be considering first. But hey, you want to play D&D second edition? Like, go fucking for it. Like, go for it. I don't know. You're not hurting anybody. Those books still exist. You can still get a hold of them. I mean, they might be hard to find, but you can still find them. And that does make a difference. So, go for it. You're hurting yourself with THAC0. Some people don't feel that way. And that's totally fine. Installing the tools for 4th, that is a giant pain. I had the character creator for 4th edition, and it was just so good, and it printed out the cards. It was like, tasty. THAC0, so that's to hit armor class 0. In earlier editions of Dungeons & Dragons, your armor class was a range from 10 to -10. And when you attacked somebody, it was to hit them as if they had an armor class of 0, which is actually an incredibly good armor class. Most people actually, like, your default was 10. And it was just very, very confusing. You still have the character creator installed and the files backed up. It's a good program. It is a good program. Like, it really, really is. It's like, it was an amazing tool. D&D Beyond is also an amazing tool, but then they put it behind paywalls, and that makes it a little harder for people to kind of get into. I appreciate the fact that they're trying to digitize Dungeons & Dragons to the point that it is, so that you can use their online tools properly and all that. And I do believe that developers deserve a chance to get paid. But it does make it a little harder for me to like get into it when I realize that I have to buy books all over again if I want to have access to them in D&D Beyond. So I kind of don't. With D&D Beyond, it's never been easier to hide content behind a paywall. If you are a D&D player, if you're a D&D player, my recommendation to you, if you want to really get into character sheets, there is an amazing character sheet that is called More Purple, More Better's D&D character record sheet, which basically has tons of automation and tons of information in it, and it's all done through Adobe Acrobat. You kind of have to use Adobe Acrobat instead of another PDF reader, but it's not as user friendly as D&D Beyond. Like, it absolutely isn't, but with just a little bit of learning and a little bit of tweaking around, you can get amazing character sheets with like spell lists and everything calculated for you, homebrew, official materials. It is wonderful for you if you can take a little bit of time. So if you don't have the amount of if you can't invest into D&D Beyond, there are other options out there. Aurora Builder, yes, again, that is also another great option for people who are looking to bring their 5th edition games forward well. But yeah, these are all the options the character has at the moment on one screen. It's just fantastic, Pook. It's so good. It's kind of great because it especially helps players who are new and they're like, I don't know what I can do in this situation. Well, yes, you do. It's all right there. Grapple rules. Is there a system out there that you don't need a college degree to understand it? Well, I'll have a hot take for you at this point. The reason why grapple rules are convoluted is because what they don't want to tell you is that grappling is actually a really stupid combat move for most people. And the reason why it's put into games is because people like the idea of grappling, even though it's, in most senses of combat, it's a bad idea. If somebody has a sword and you run forward to try to grapple with them, you are at a disadvantage, but most players don't want to see that much of a disadvantage, so it becomes complicated. You grapple somebody who's holding a gun, and it's very common that that person is just going to turn the gun around and shoot your ass. So it's tough. It's tough. And I totally get it, but I haven't found a grapple system that I love yet. I'm sure that some people out there are going to have comments. If you want to suplex a train, play Final Fantasy VI, Magical Captain King, because there you can absolutely suplex a train. That train is just waiting for you to lift it up and slam it down, and then it will keep right on chugging. Just suplex away. Oh, also, fuck people who are elitist about calling it Final Fantasy 3 or Final Fantasy 6. It's fine to call it Final Fantasy 3. It was released in the United States as Final Fantasy 3. It's fine. It's totally fine. Yeah, you can play FFD6 too. Yeah, you're right. And then it is a feat. Real Brick Wall mentions, on the other hand, basically any real-world discipline of close combat fighting, including armed fighting, includes instructions on initiating grabs and holds. It's kind of an important tool in a fight. It absolutely is. Like, it totally is. It is incredibly important. It is also one of those things that people don't tell you about guns, for instance, that I forget exactly what it is. I think it's 7 meters. But if somebody is within 7 meters of you and they decide to surprise attack you, that isn't necessarily enough time for you to draw your weapon and aim and fire. So that's why people often are told to fire their firearms from a distance, because they won't necessarily help you if they're within a certain amount. The reality of all combat systems is that they're simulations, and they are not perfect simulations. They're meant to be fun. They're not meant to be accurate. If you wanted accuracy, you just go out and LARP it. So that's the problem. So if you look at most HEMA treaties, most all fights end in grapples, but that's because HEMA fights are not real fights, right? They're not. Any fight that has a rule to it is not a real fight. And any fight that's designed to minimize the amount of permanent injury that somebody takes is also suffers from that. They are simulations. They are not reality. There's a reason why Ultimate Fighting originally started as like, there's no rules. And then they realized, oh shit, we actually have to have a whole bunch of rules, because people don't want to watch real fighting. And people don't want to necessarily participate in real fighting. It's just that simple, right? Like in HEMA, you're not allowed to run somebody through with a sword. You just can't, which means that it is not a realistic sword fight. It is more realistic than other sword fights. It's certainly more realistic than like picking up a pool noodle and trying to whack somebody with it, but it isn't realistic. And that's also all the fighting that you see in video games, in movies, television shows, stage. None of those are realistic either. They're meant for entertainment. So we take them as entertainment. I mean, that was the promise of the Wii. The promise of the Wiimote, right, was that you could like, oh, I can wave this around like a sword. I can finally be... And because lightsabers don't have the blade until you turn them on, they were like, this could be a lightsaber. But of course, the problem with using a Wiimote as a sword is that it has no resistance, right? You're always just slashing through things. So if you're having a lightsaber battle with somebody and you try to swing your Wiimote and somebody else swings a Wiimote and the blades are meant to connect, there's no resistance. You will just move forward. So it cannot be a proper sword fight. So while it looked really neat and people got really excited, there was no way that a Wiimote was going to give you a great sword fighting experience. So that's not a hot take. BBC is to bomb. Whacking people with a pool noodle is all sorts of fun. And Brain Torn Out mentions, I've had to fight before. All the HEMA, which is... all the HEMA in the world wouldn't help you when you can just pick up a baseball bat and smash somebody in the gooch so hard they start emitting sounds like a malfunctioning modem. It's unfortunately true. Anybody who tells you my martial art is the most badass martial art, there's always going to be something else that beats it. And remember that all martial arts also make assumptions and have rules. Grappling is... Yep, as Lo mentions right here, grappling is only good if everybody agrees that we're grappling. Fighting is different. And yes. But what if your martial art is gun? Well, sometimes gun isn't the best, because I can also just drop a nuke on you from orbit, right? Like, it's the reality is that reality is boring. We love simulation, and simulation is always going to have edge cases that will not work out properly, which is why nobody has come up with a great grappling system yet, and hopefully one day they will. But all the grappling systems that I've encountered are either way underpowered or way overpowered for what they are. It's why there are also things like, yes. Okay. So Robert Wall, this is something that I think is absolutely wonderful to point out. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best martial art in a flat, empty octagon with a referee and one-on-one fights. Yep. Yeah. I can block your dagger strike, but only if you attack me in this very specific way. Yeah. Like, look, it's great to study a martial art. It's fantastic. It's study self-defense, study firearms, study whatever you want, like learn, get better with your body. It's fantastic. But don't go into something believing that now you're invincible, because you're not. You can't be. Why in role-playing games? Start exercising the rule of cool. Start using things like the orichalcum rule. If something doesn't make sense, but the rules say that they should, but by the story they don't, let the story go first. If you have a gun to somebody's head and you're like, move and I'll pull the trigger, and then they move, well, if you're playing a high fantasy story where somebody can move super, super fucking fast, great. Let it happen. But if you're also playing a story which is like hyper gritty and realistic, and the person doesn't have the barrel of the gun directly behind someone's head, but is standing like a few meters away, like, and they start to move, and the person's like, okay, I'll shoot you, and they shoot you. The rules might say, well, now you have to roll initiative and figure all this stuff out. No, just fucking shoot him. Like, it's done. So. Yeah. Yeah. Brain turnout, it's very true, right? Like, one of the things that also a lot of people don't remember is that you could be the best fighter in the world, but if I've got 100 pounds on you, I'm probably going to win. Like, and that's just the way it is. Like, it's not a guarantee, but all the training in the world will only make up so much of just physics. So, more luchadors in games, period. Lo, I really hope that you've played Guacamelee and Guacamelee 2. Games that, first of all, were, I believe, if I remember correctly, developed here in Montreal. But they're just all about luchadors. That's their whole thing. It's fantastic. And the Day of the Dead and all that. It's great. So, folks, thanks for tuning in with your hot takes. I had a lot of fun, even though it might have cost me some of my hydration, but I got backup, so that's fantastic. And I am looking forward to seeing as many of you as who want to be there on Sunday for episode 2 of season 2 of Exalt Twitch Academy. Remember that if you have not caught up, there's a 2-minute video out there that will get you caught up. That's all you gotta watch. That video alone, the season 1 recap, will get you to the point where you can tune in live. So please, if you like, if you do what you want, if you want to watch everything first, if that's how you would prefer to watch it, that's great. Go for it. Do it that way. But if you're wondering what I'd prefer to see you live if you can make it, or I'd prefer to, even if you can't make it live, for you to be part of the discussion as it's happening, which means it's okay. Go through the recap. You can watch other things later at another time, but definitely don't beat yourself up if you've missed a few episodes. So I am going to leave the combat discussion, which, if I don't miss my guess, within 20 minutes will attract chuds from all over the internet who will come in and have I am very badass comments to make about combat. Whereas I will always readily admit that I only know how to fake hurt somebody. And I will say, folks, thanks for tuning in. Tomorrow, Elizabeth A. Neal, Punch Effect, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Saturday, Drew Crew and Doomed. But until then, we'll see all of you. But the easiest way to have someone see the way you do is to use your word hole. Oh, nothing on Saturday. Ha! Fuck Saturday. Fuck Saturday. We'll see you next time.